She'll freak when she sees it's empty. My daughter Sarah smirked into her phone. I froze in the hallway, my hand still resting on the cold brass of the front door handle. I had just come back from my morning walk, stepping quietly into my own house, only to hear my only child plotting my financial ruin from my own living room sofa. I didn't gasp. I didn't drop my keys. At 65, life had thrown enough curveballs at me that panic was no longer my default reaction. Instead, I stood perfectly still, listening to the voice of the girl I had raised. "David and I have it all figured out," Sarah continued, her tone dripping with a chilling casualness. I logged into her banking app. I scheduled the transfer for tomorrow morning at 9, the full 200,000. Once it hits our joint account, we are closing on that townhouse in the suburbs. She's too old to need that kind of money anyway. What's she going to do? Go on a cruise? She laughed, a sharp, dismissive sound that echoed off the hallway walls. My husband Arthur and I had worked for 40 years to build that savings account. It was my safety net, my peace of mind, and the foundation of my independence. I had added Sarah's name to the account 6 months ago, trusting her completely when she insisted it was a necessary precaution, just in case of an emergency. I now realized the only emergency was her greed. I slowly backed out the front door, easing it shut without making a single sound. I stood on my front porch, the morning breeze rustling the oak trees in my yard. My chest felt tight, but I pushed the emotion down. Tears would not protect my savings. Tears would not secure my future. Action would. I walked straight to my car, pulled out my phone and checked the time. It was 10 a.m. I had exactly 23 hours before Sarah's scheduled transfer processed. I started the engine, my mind completely clear. I wasn't going to be a victim in my own life. I was going to secure my perimeter. As I drove toward the center of town, I thought about the last 10 months. Sarah and her husband, David, had moved into my 4-bedroom home under the pretense of saving for a house of their own. First, I welcomed the company. The house had felt far too large and silent since Arthur passed away. But within weeks, the dynamic shifted. They didn't treat me like a mother or a generous host. They treated me like a living maid who happened to pay the utility bills. Sarah would leave her dirty dishes in the sink, expecting them to be washed by the time she got home from work. David complained about the Wi-Fi speed, demanding I upgrade the package to suit his gaming habits. They took over the television, the garage, and my peace and quiet. Whenever I brought up boundaries or asked them to pitch in, Sarah would roll her eyes and sigh heavily. "Mom, we're stressed," she would complain. "We are trying to build a future. You have this big empty house all to yourself. You should be happy to help us." I had endured it, biting my tongue, hoping their stay was truly temporary. I had even justified adding her to my bank account when David brought it up during a dinner conversation. He had framed it as an act of love, a way to make sure I was cared for if my health ever declined. I was healthy, active, and fully capable. But their constant infantilizing had briefly worn down my defenses. Now, gripping the steering wheel, I saw the entire picture. They weren't trying to build a future through hard work. They were trying to steal mine. They saw me as an expiration date, a stepping stone, a resource to be drained. I pulled into the parking lot of my bank. I didn't feel heartbroken anymore. The sorrow had burned away, leaving behind a very calm, very cold determination. I turned off the ignition, grabbed my purse, and walked through the glass doors. It was time to correct my mistake. The bank was mostly empty, just the hum of the air conditioning and the soft typing of tellers. I walked straight to the desk of a branch manager I had known for years. I sat down, pulled out my driver's license, and placed it on the desk. "I need to make some immediate changes to my accounts," I stated clearly, skipping the usual pleasantries. I didn't explain the betrayal. I didn't tell him my daughter was a thief. I simply gave instructions. I asked him to cancel any pending transfers scheduled from my main savings account. The manager clicked a few buttons on his keyboard and nodded, confirming a transfer of $200,000 was indeed set to process the next morning. "Cancel it," I instructed, my voice entirely steady. "Then I want you to remove all funds from that joint account." Open a completely new individual account in my name only. Transfer every single penny into it. Leave exactly $10 in the old account just so it remains open and doesn't send an automatic closure alert to my daughter. The manager worked quickly, printing out forms for me to sign. I read every line carefully before pressing my pen to the paper. Within 20 minutes, my money was completely secured behind new account numbers, new passwords, and a strict verification protocol that only I could pass. Sarah's digital access now pointed to an empty shell. I thanked the manager, took my new debit card, and walked back out into the sunshine. The immediate threat was neutralized, but the problem of Sarah and David living in my house remained. I could not sleep under the same roof as two people who were actively trying to rob me. I drove to the hardware store next. I walked down the aisles picking up heavy-duty garbage bags and a permanent marker. I didn't need to argue with them. I didn't need to hear their excuses or listen to their lies. I just needed them gone. I returned to my house around noon. Sarah and David's cars were gone. They had both left for their office jobs. The house was quiet again. I walked upstairs to the guest bedroom they had claimed. The room was a mess. Clothes draped over chairs, empty mugs on the nightstands, and David's shoes scattered across the rug. I unrolled the first heavy-duty garbage bag and got to work. I wasn't aggressive. I didn't damage their belongings or throw things around. I simply folded their clothes and placed them into the bags. I packed David's gaming console, Sarah's expensive makeup, their shoes and their coats. I worked clearing the closet, emptying the dresser drawers and stripping the bedsheets. With every item I packed away, the room felt lighter. The oppressive weight of their entitlement began to lift from my shoulders. Took me 3 hours to pack up their entire lives. When I was finished, there were 15 large black bags lined up neatly in the hallway. I dragged them downstairs one by one and arranged them on the front porch. I placed them safely under the awning out of the sun and potential rain. I didn't touch their important documents or passports. I left a small, neat cardboard box on top of the bags containing their sensitive items. Standing on the porch looking at the mountain of black plastic, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. I had provided them with a free home, cooked their meals, and tolerated their disrespect. In return, they had tried to strip me of my life savings. I went back inside and closed the front door. The physical evidence of their presence was gone from my home, but there was still one crucial step left to ensure they couldn't simply force their way back in. I pulled my phone from my pocket and dialed a number I had found online while at the hardware store. The locksmith arrived within 30 minutes. He was a quiet, efficient man who didn't ask questions. I directed him to the front door, the back patio door, and the side garage entrance. I need new deadbolts and handle locks on all of them, I instructed. The highest security grade you have. I sat at the kitchen island drinking a fresh cup of coffee and listening to the comforting sound of metal clicking and drills whirring. For 10 months, I had felt like a guest in my own home, constantly tiptoeing around Sarah's moods and David's complaints. Now, with every screw being tightened, I was taking my territory back. By 4 o'clock, the locksmith handed me a ring of shiny new keys. I paid him in cash from the withdrawal I had made earlier. As his van pulled out of my driveway, I locked the front door, testing the heavy, solid thud of the new deadbolt. It worked perfectly. I walked into the living room and sat down in my favorite armchair. The house was perfectly silent. I didn't turn on the television. I didn't read a book. I simply sat there enjoying the atmosphere of my restored sanctuary. I looked at the clock. It was 4:30. Sarah and David usually finished work at 5 and would be home by 5:30. I picked up my phone and sent a single text message to a group chat with both of them. Come straight home after work. See you soon. I didn't add a smiley face. I didn't explain. I placed the phone face down on the coffee table. The trap they had tried to set for me was empty, and the boundary I was about to enforce was entirely solid. I poured myself another cup of coffee and waited for the show to begin. At exactly 5:15 p.m., my phone screen lit up. The caller ID flashed Sarah's name. I let it ring. It stopped, then immediately started ringing again. I took a sip of my coffee, watching the screen light up the dimming living room. I knew exactly what was happening on the other end. Sarah, likely sitting in her car in her office parking lot, had decided to check her banking app. Perhaps she wanted to gloat over the pending transaction one more time. Perhaps she had noticed a glitch. Instead of seeing a pending transfer of $200,000, she had discovered an account balance of $10 followed by an access denied error. The phone stopped ringing. A barrage of text messages started flooding in. "Mom, why isn't the banking app working?" "Mom, answer the phone. Did you go to the bank today?" "Mom, there is a glitch with the account." I didn't type a single letter in response. I didn't owe her an explanation. And I certainly wasn't going to have this conversation over text. I wanted to see her face. I wanted to look her in the eyes when she realized that her quiet, accommodating mother was not the fool she had taken her for. I stood up from my chair and walked to the front window. I adjusted the blinds just enough to have a clear view of the driveway and the front porch. The 15 black garbage bags sat waiting. 10 minutes later, David's SUV came speeding around the corner of my street. He didn't slow down gracefully. He slammed on the brakes, the tires screeching as the car jerked into the driveway. The engine was barely off before the passenger door flew open. Sarah stepped out, her phone clutched in her hand, her face a mask of panic and frustration. I stepped back from the window and walked slowly toward the front entryway. I stood behind the solid oak door, waiting for them to reach the porch. Through the small glass panels near the top of the door, I watched Sarah storm up the walkway, David close behind her. She didn't even notice the mountain of garbage bags at first. Her eyes were glued to her phone, her thumb tapping frantically on the screen. She reached the porch and finally looked up. She stopped dead in her tracks. David bumped into her from behind. "What is this?" David muttered, looking at the black bags. Sarah ignored him. She stepped up to the front door and jammed her key into the lock. She twisted it, but the key wouldn't turn. She pulled it out, looked at it, and shoved it back in, wiggling it aggressively. Nothing happened. The new deadbolt held firm. "Mom!" Sarah shouted, pounding her fist against the heavy wood. "Mom, open the door. My key is broken. Open the door right now." I took a slow, deep breath. I unlocked the deadbolt and turned the handle, pulling the heavy wooden door inward. However, I left the sturdy metal screen door firmly closed and locked between us. Sarah looked at me through the metal mesh. Her hair was slightly messy from the wind, her eyes wide with a mixture of anger and confusion. She pointed at her phone. "What did you do?" she demanded, her voice shrill. "I checked the bank app and the account is empty. My access is gone. Did you get hacked? The money is missing." David stepped forward, trying to look past me into the house. "Brenda, you need to call the fraud department immediately. We had plans for that money. You need to fix this right now." I looked at them. Two able-bodied adults throwing a tantrum on my porch because they couldn't steal my retirement fund. I didn't yell. I didn't raise my voice. Smiled. "Where is my money?" Sarah screamed, her hands gripping the handle of the locked screen door, shaking it violently. I looked at her fingers turning white against the metal. "My money, Sarah," I corrected her, my voice low and perfectly steady. She stopped shaking the door, her breath catching in her throat. "She'll freak when she sees it's empty," my daughter had smirked just hours earlier, confident in her betrayal. But when she walked up to the house, she found me sitting there calm and satisfied. I looked at her and said, "And I have some news for you. The money isn't missing. It is exactly where it belongs, safely locked away in an account you will never ever have access to." Sarah's face drained of color. The arrogant, controlling woman from the morning vanished, replaced by someone who suddenly realized the floor had completely disappeared beneath her feet. She looked over her shoulder at David, then back at me, her mouth opening and closing silently. You heard me," she finally whispered, the reality of her own words echoing in her mind. "Every single word," I replied. "I heard you planning to steal my future so you could buy a townhouse." I heard you laughing about it. So I took care of my finances. And then I took care of my house. I gestured toward the 15 black garbage bags sitting on the concrete. Are you crazy? David suddenly interjected, stepping in front of Sarah. He tried his best intimidation tactic, puffing out his chest. You packed our stuff in trash bags. You locked us out. You can't do this, Brenda. We live here. I locked eyes with him, completely unfazed by his posturing. You lived here as my guests. You abused my hospitality and you tried to rob me. Your stay is officially over. You can't just kick us out on the street. Sarah cried, her voice cracking. The aggressive entitlement was gone, rapidly replaced by panic. Where are we supposed to go? We don't have a down payment without that money. That sounds like a financial problem for the two of you to solve, I replied calmly. You both have full-time jobs. You have cars. You have all your belongings sitting right there in those bags. Go to a hotel. Rent an apartment. I truly do not care. David crossed his arms. We are not leaving. Brenda, open this door. We need to go inside and talk about this like family. We have nothing to talk about, I said, stepping back from the screen door. You have your things. The box on top has your passports and social security cards. If you refuse to leave my property, I will simply go inside, turn off the porch light and go to sleep. Do whatever you want out here. You are not coming inside. Sarah pressed her face closer to the screen. Mom, please. I'm your daughter. You can't do this to me. I'm sorry. I was just stressed. I didn't mean what I said on the phone. You meant every word, Sarah, I said, feeling absolutely no guilt. You made your choice this morning. Now you get to live with the consequences. I didn't wait for David to argue again. I didn't wait for more fake apologies. I reached out, grabbed the heavy wooden front door, and firmly pulled it shut. The solid click of the deadbolt echoed through the entryway. I locked it, turned around and walked into my kitchen. I didn't peek through the blinds. I didn't check my phone. I simply let them stand outside in the reality they had created. For the next 20 minutes, I heard muffled arguing from the porch. Sarah crying, David cursing. I heard the rustling of heavy plastic bags being dragged across the concrete, followed by the slamming of a trunk. Finally, an engine started and tires backed out of the driveway. When I was certain they were gone, I walked back to the living room and sat in the quiet. The house felt massive, incredibly still, and beautifully peaceful. In the weeks that followed, Sarah tried everything to bridge the gap. She sent long, emotional text messages blaming David for the idea. She left voicemails crying about how much she missed me. I read the texts and listened to the voicemails without a shred of emotion. Then I blocked her number. I didn't need the toxic noise in my life. A boundary is only a boundary if you actually enforce it. I didn't file a police report. I didn't hire a lawyer. The money was safe and the house was mine again. I didn't want a drawn-out legal battle. I just wanted them out of my life. I spent the next month redesigning the guest bedroom. I painted the walls a soft, calming blue. I bought a comfortable reading chair and set up a small library. I started attending a local gardening club and finally booked a solo trip to Italy, something I had wanted to do for a decade. I am 65 years old. Some people might think I am lonely living in this big house all by myself without my daughter, but they would be wrong. For the first time in a year, I wake up every morning feeling light, secure, and completely in control of my own destiny. Peace, I learned, is worth far more than the illusion of family. If there's one thing I took away from this whole experience, it's that unconditional love shouldn't mean unconditional access to your peace, your space, or your hard-earned security. We're often taught that we have to endlessly tolerate bad behavior simply because it comes from family. But the truth is, you don't need to scream, argue, or explain yourself to someone who is committed to disrespecting you. Sometimes the most powerful and empowering thing you can do is quietly change the lock, set a firm boundary, and choose yourself. Protecting your peace isn't selfish, it's necessary. If this story resonated with you, or if you've ever had to set a tough boundary in your own life, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. We all have those moments where we have to stand up for ourselves. And I love reading your experiences. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and give this video a like for more stories about resilience and taking back control of our lives. Thanks for hanging out with me today, and I'll see you in the next one.